Well, hey there, and welcome back to Sonic Safari, a channel featuring tales of record collecting. I am Marcus, your host, a Swedish hipster lost in the fog in San Francisco. On last week's episode, we talked about Blue Note compilations and why they are a great way to start listening to different types of jazz, or maybe just a great excuse to move your bouteille on the dance floor. On today's episode, another installment of the soundtrack of my life, but first, this. Okay, great. So yet another video talking about what inner and outer sleeves to use for your vinyl records. But before you go away, just hold on for 1 second. I promise you this video is not about that. Sure, I will talk about what inner and outer sleeves I use, but I really wanted to talk about something that dawned on me the other day. So while there are a lot of videos talking about what inner and outer sleeves to use, I haven't really seen that many videos talking about in what combination and in what direction to use them. So this video is really about how do you wear your record sleeves. So one of my projects during lockdown was to sleeve all my records. And for the outer sleeves, I'm using the ones from musicrecordshop.com after a recommendation from Dylan over at Noble Record. And they are really great, highly recommendable. They are good quality, they are not crystal clear, but that is not a priority to me as I find the price for those to not warrant the little time I display the record while playing. And these sleeves from Music Record Shop, on the other hand, are very affordable. 1,000 for about $140 US. So buying 1,000 sleeves, I was sure that these are gonna last forever and ever, and I only have 12 left. So for my inner sleeves, I'm using the MoFi ones, and they are really fantastic. And without using the fancy words, because I cannot pronounce them, it's basically a sheet of rice paper which is sandwiched in between two sheets of plastic, one side being translucent. So on one side, you are protecting your vinyl from scuffing, and you can also see the vinyl through the plastic on one side, which is especially great if you have colored vinyl. Now, unfortunately, the MoFi sleeve have gone out of stock for quite a while, pushing up the price, so I did switch to the invest in vinyl ones that I find on Amazon for about 20 bucks, 50 sleeves. They are very similar to the MoFi sleeves, but not as cool, but they do the job. I did realize that the MoFi ones are now back in stock, so I might switch over to them moving forward. Okay, so now for the fun part. There are obviously different approaches. What I do is to keep the record sleeve and the record separate inside of an outer sleeve. The good thing about this is that you avoid ring wear, but it does mean that your record take up more space. And trust me, if you have a lot of record, that actually makes a significant difference. I have the opening of the outer sleeve pointing straight up as well as the inner sleeve, and like that, it's easy to take the record in and out, and also a very silly detail, but I like that the writing on the inner sleeve is the way that you can actually read it. And just a couple of quick tips when it comes to paper sleeves. So if a record comes in a paper sleeve with lyrics or similar on it, I do keep it within the jacket. So if I trade or sell it in the future, I can switch my MoFi sleeve to the original one. And similarly, even if it is only a plain paper white sleeve, I do keep it again, because if you're gonna trade it or sell it, you wanna have that so you can get the MoFi sleeve out and put back the original one. So another approach would be to keep the inner sleeve inside of the record jacket where it's supposed to be, I guess. This means that you would have to take off the outer sleeve every time you wanna get to the record. But if you keep the inner sleeve pointing to the side, you can just kind of tilt the jacket and get to the record pretty easily. So this approach does save space. However, I do find it that taking the sleeve off every time we want to get to the record is a bit time consuming, and I also think it will give some wear to the jacket over time. There is one last combination which I don't really think is feasible, and I'll tell you why. So you can kind of combine the two, so you keep the inner sleeve inside of the record jacket, but the outer sleeve pointing to the side instead of up. Like this, it's easy to get the record in and out. However, when you put the record back into your collection, the outer sleeve get all crumbled up. So I don't think this is a really feasible solution. So how about not having an outer sleeve at all? Please don't. I think it's much better to take care of your record by having an outer sleeve. So I know this is a very silly question, but please drop everything you're doing right now and answer me, how do you wear your inner sleeve? So it's time for another installment of the soundtrack of my life, where I look at one record and talk about it a bit more in depth about why it matters to me, and it really is just an excuse for you to get to know me a bit better. So in the first installment of this series, I talked about Dire Straits' Brothers in Arms, which was really the awakening for me and how I discovered music in the first place, going in the car to see my grandparents as an 8-year-old. Today, I want to talk about a kind of a different type of awakening. So in 2009, I was living in Madrid, in Spain. I had recently gotten married the year before, and my wife and I were living in the best apartment in Madrid. We were living right in the center of the Soho district in Madrid. It was a teeny tiny apartment, but it had 2 balconies facing the street, and our neighbors was a monastery, so we could see the courtyard where the nuns would come out every now and then to pick apples and dance in a circle, which is actually a true story. And life couldn't really get any better when we found out that we were expecting our first child. And I guess my fatherly instinct kicked in, but in a way that it can only do to a vinyl nerd. At the time, I was really into the New York indie wave. I was listening a lot to records like this, The Strokes, This Is It, Weezer, the Blue Album, and also the White Stripes, Elephant. But now I felt that I needed a different type of atmosphere at home. So one night we went to dinner to one of our favorite restaurants, Gumbo, which was just down the street, and it serves the most amazing southern food. We were regulars, but the waiter could never remember my wife's name and always called her Carmen, and we gave up trying to correct him, so at one point she just became Carmen, at least when we went to that restaurant. So they had a small turntable in a corner, and they would always be playing jazz. So this night I finally asked him, "What are you playing?" And he said it was Chet Baker Sings, and that was it. I knew exactly what I needed. So since then, Chet Baker's always had a very special place in my heart, because it really reminds me of that time in Madrid, and it was also really the start of my journey into jazz. So I wanted to show you some of the record in my Chet Baker collection, starting with this one, of course, Chet Baker Sings, and this is the now very sought after Tomeport version that came out in 2020. This is really the perfect album to me. His trumpet playing, his very unique voice, and his bad boy looks, it's the perfect combination, even if you're pregnant or not. It's no wonder he was called the Prince of Cool. So I did want to show some records from the later stages of his career. He did unfortunately have issues with drug abuse, and during one of these drug deals he was assaulted and he lost multiple teeth, or was it just one? Because apparently Chet Baker himself overstated the injuries when really he only lost one tooth. But independently, it's hard to play trumpet without teeth in your mouth, so he did manage to get back, and he established his career in Europe, and that's where these records are coming from. And first up we have this one, Chet Baker live in Sweden. This is a live recording from Gothenburg in 1984 on Dragon Records. He is surrounded by Swedish cats led by the pianist Åke Johansson. Now, being Swedish myself, I guess it's pretty obvious why I picked this one up, but the sound quality is actually pretty decent, and he has some swagger from his earlier years, even though the sound is much more melancholic. So next up we have this one, Chet's Choice, on the Dutch label Crisscross from 1985. Now, Crisscross was founded after having organized tours for jazz musicians that visited Holland, and they started to release the recordings that were made there. So what makes this recording different is that he's accompanied by Belgian guitarist Philip Catherine. And in between his now different playing style and the sound of the guitar, the sound on this record is very different compared to his earlier recordings, and it's a really good one to check out. And the last record I wanted to show you is this one, This Is Always, released on Steeplechase in 1982, which is a Danish label. Now, this label was founded by a student attending the University of Copenhagen, and he started recording the live sessions at Jazzhus Montmartre, which is a jazz club in Copenhagen, and then achieving the rights to release them, and this is one of them. So even though Chet Baker is struggling with addiction during this period, the sound on this session is really good, and he's very lucid and present, even though the tone is much more melancholic, which isn't really a surprise for a man that at this point has gone through quite a lot. So one of my favorite things about my love for Chet Baker and his music is that it has been passed on to my daughter, who's now 12 years old. Every night before going to sleep, she will read in her bed listening to Chet Baker, and I can only assume that it all started in that apartment in Madrid, listening to Chet Baker inside the tummy of her mother. Alright, so that's it for today's episode. Like, subscribe, and all of that good stuff. On next week's episode, get ready for some record collecting speed dating. Are we swiping left or right? Until then, tack och adjö.